From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host,
Let's hope nobody sues,
Brad Mendenhall.
Hey kids, it is episode 257 of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast. From the excellent Claremont Run, from the excellent Claremont Run, from the excellent Claremont Run, from the excellent Claremont Run. I can't pronounce Claremont Run. Chris Claremont. From the excellent Claremont Run, Andrew Deman is here to talk about the return of the comic book series Saga. In case you aren't familiar with Saga, it is written by Brian K. Vaughan and illustrated by Fiona Staples. It debuted in March 2012 and went on a hiatus in July 2018. It finally returned with issue 55 January of this year. And it is awesome. Anywho, let's get to it.
Very excited. We haven't spoken in a while. He's a favorite, really smart and a good guy, and brought up a great subject to talk about. So from the excellent Claremont Run, Andrew Deman. Andrew, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me back. I think the last time we talked was on Gosh Golly Wow, talking about Excalibur number 3. Which was like my favorite conversation about Excalibur ever, just talking about the sort of hero introduction scene in that book.
It's one of my all-time favorite individual comic book issues ever.
Yeah, that was fun.
And it ties into what we're going to be talking about. Comics often aren't written, especially the more modern you get, comics aren't written for like single great issues. They're part of a bigger story. I remember growing up, I started reading like Amazing Spider-Man. That was my first really introduction to comics. And around the 260s, when it was Tom DeFalco writing and Ron Frenz drawing, and they certainly had the arcs, but often you would have one or two great issue runs. And I'm thinking of Spider-Man fighting Firelord, or there was one amazing issue that was tied into Secret Wars 2, where Mephisto and the Beyonder had a bet on if Spider-Man would do the right thing. And it was just an amazing single issue. It doesn't feel like comics do that as well now. I know a lot of it was writing for the trade paperback.
Yeah, that's huge.
One thing that really showed the bad part of that was like a big throwdown between Wolverine and Sabretooth. They were going to have like just a big fight. And they stretched that fight out for 6 issues. And it's like, this is only 1 or 2 issues tops. It was just 2 guys with healing factors cutting up on each other and then trying to create weird cliffhangers where it wasn't there. I was like, oh, this sort of sucks.
Yeah, I think it's exactly as you're saying. It's sort of a product of the modern age and the emphasis on that sort of slower moving visual language rather than the condensed storytelling with a lot of like text. So as a result of that, you're automatically only ever doing one act. So you're not thinking about a fully contained 3-act structure that creates a satisfying resolution. And I think Saga is a good example of a comic series that does make great individual issues.
Saga, and that's why you're here. You suggested we talk about Saga, and I love Saga so much.
Yeah.
And it's finally back. And it was gone for over 2 years.
Yeah, 2018, started up again last month.
Amazing series created by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. Staples does amazing art. Vaughan, his low-key has become one of my favorite writers because one of my favorite comics ever was Y the Last Man.
Yes.
He also did Runaways. He's not the flashiest of creators. He's not Alan Moore or Bendis. He doesn't write the most popular stuff, like a lot of cult stuff, because often the stuff he writes is definitely has no all ages aspect to it.
No, not at all. Yeah, I think he's sort of very out there as an artist. I think one of the things that he does extraordinarily well is he gives his stories a lot of space for interpretation. Like, he doesn't tell you what to think necessarily. He creates a lot of fragmented narratives. He creates lots of like time jumps, all these things that leave you filling in the gaps in his stories, which is a really cool way that a narrative can kind of simulate the gutter effect in the comics visualization, because you're co-authoring that story in your brain just to create the cohesion. And I think that makes for a really immersive experience for people who like to, think about their comic for a long time after they put it down.
I think this is really there with Saga, but it's been there with his other writing as well, where it's very adult subject matter, but it never feels like it's there to be titillating, or I don't think any, although there's a lot of sexuality and a lot of nudity and a lot of, just from that aspect in his work, I don't imagine too many like really excited 14-year-olds grabbing an issue of Saga to look at the boobs.
No, it's so integrated into the story and to the characters, and the sexuality is presented in a really kind of sex positive light, in that it's not sort of male gazy or anything like that. It's very much, this is an aspect of human existence, like every other aspect of human existence. So there's a kind of, I don't know, I would say a realism to it that is really refreshing. And I think that maybe goes along with the maturity of the book, not just in the subject matter, but in like the narrative tone. This is largely a story about just having a family and getting by.
The sexuality is earned. I'm sure there's probably something that is drawn by a woman. So they avoid a lot of the porny poses. I just think back when I was growing up reading comics, really deep into the Todd McFarlane and what he did to Mary Jane Watson.
Yeah.
A lot of arched backs.
Impossibly so, yeah.
Every chance to draw her in sexy underwear or bathing suits, and it felt salacious in a way that, despite the fact that Alana is a very attractive character and is drawn as such, it never feels like she's a blow-up doll.
Exactly. I think the Mary Jane example, like when you do that kind of stuff, like it works, it's fine. I'm not complaining, except if I were a fan of Mary Jane as a character, because it pushes her out of subjectivity and into objectivity. Now she's something to look at, not someone to identify with. And I don't think Saga could possibly work if they didn't adapt that sort of opposite strategy, exactly as you're saying, because then it would just be, the story of Marco, space pirate.
I think there's a real strength to Saga in that Hazel's the main character. She's the narrator. We're watching this through her eyes, which is tough to do. I'm so impressed that they can do this, where you have, for a huge chunks of this story, she was an infant. I mean, literally, the series starts.
Yeah, it starts with her birth.
But because they use the narration, it's not Marco's story. It's not Elena's story. And that is good because you're right, it avoids becoming Marco's space pirate. Also, I don't know who's going to survive.
Yeah. Like, we've got Hazel in the plot armor, nobody else. And the book makes it very clear that nobody is safe, which is good storytelling. I know it was originally pitched as Star Wars meets Game of Thrones. I think that's maybe one of the aspects it took from Game of Thrones, which I really like. I like stories where you literally don't know what's going to happen next, or who's safe and who's not safe, or even if the core cast is going to stay together in the next issue, which they usually don't. Like, it falls apart a lot. So I think Saga, it's a massive cliche, but it's very much an edge of your seat kind of book.
I remember when it first really struck me, that no one is safe, is I remember at the beginning of the series, and the name of the character is escaping me, but Hazel's ghost nanny.
Oh, Isabella, I believe.
It was a great and rich character who was already dead.
Yeah.
If anyone was going to make it, the person already dead.
Seems like a lock.
Yeah. And then they killed her. They killed her, quote unquote, pretty quick.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is bad. No one is safe except for Hazel. And even then, how safe is Hazel? We don't know. Their character's narrating the story. For all we know, she's on her deathbed as a 100-year-old woman, or 5 minutes after the last issue that you read.
Yeah, and she provides some very ominous narration, right? Which kind of makes you wonder what level of disaster has befallen her.
How quickly, because I glommed on to Saga. I think the series had been out for like a couple years. Like I think it was around issue 24 or so.
Okay.
And I had heard like a lot of rumblings about how good it was. And I finally picked up the first trade paperback and really got engrossed in it. At what point did you get pulled into the series?
Okay, so I actually got pulled into the series because I made a huge mistake. This was a few years back. I was president of the Canadian Society of the Study of Comics, so I had to set the program for our conference. And we had concurrent panels, as many conferences do. So you can choose which panel you want to go to. And it was like the last panel of the day. And I put Saga in one room. And I put another panel with like some really talented comic scholars who I was sure were going to get a lot of attention in the other room. And I felt horrible because everybody went to the Saga panel. And I alone went to the other panel and had to apologize to the people I had booked in that room. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I brutally underestimated the popularity of Saga amongst comic scholars. So after that, I had a moral obligation to check it out. And just as you said, I kind of very quickly fell in love with it. And then from that horrible experience, took the observation that I've never seen a comic picked up this quickly by the comic scholarly community. Never. Nothing on this scale. It's really amazing. This is a story that isn't even finished yet. And the wealth of journal articles and books and endless online criticism of Saga is really impressive. This is, for me, a cultural moment, which I think is why I was excited to talk about it with you.
And there's a lot of things that I find really interesting about it. But one thing is there's protagonists and antagonists, but good guys and bad guys, not so much.
Maybe Hazel sometimes.
Maybe Hazel, but Hazel could be a little brat.
Yeah.
The Will
is a monster, but you still kind of identify with him. It's so weird.
It started at the beginning because he was insufferable and unlikable and sort of arrogant and, also trying to kill the good guys.
Yeah.
But then it was very much the bad guy with honor or assassin with honor. And one of the first things we see him do before he even really engages in the chase is he rescued Sophie.
That's right.
He's the bad guy and does some really bad stuff, but then you forget that when he was in love with the stalk, when his sister dies, and you actually do feel his pain for losing his sister. So even though this is a guy, and spoiler alert for something that happened almost 4 years ago, he kills Marco.
Yeah.
Not just kills him, but then 4 years later, the next issue, he's carrying around Marco, our hero's skull, and proceeds to have sex with Marco's former fiance in front of the skull.
Yeah, that scene I'm still a little confused by, but I'm assuming we're going somewhere, so I'm kind of on the ride for it. It's so strange. It's largely a text about pacifism as one of its major themes, right? The idea of the broad consequence of violence. So like you brought up the example of the stalk. Prince Robot IV, who was another horrible character that we kind of root for, he just casually killed the stalk. Like it was nothing. She was just in his way, right? And he had the jump on her, so he killed her and moved on. But we know, because we know the Will, that the Will is going to be haunted by this forever. It's going to wreck him, and it's going to create this cycle of violence and revenge. And the obvious comparison there might be Romeo and Juliet, which is obviously something that is also being invoked a lot in the book, which is again about, the broad consequence of violence and stupidity. There's really not any good guys or bad guys. There's just people in a violent world who are thereby pitted against each other tragically.
Because Marco was a jerk.
Sometimes, yeah.
Alana was not always the most likable character, and in fact, as we've come back to the series, she's a drug dealer.
Yeah, she's sometimes not even a good mother, right? To Hazel, who is our main sort of focal character. Yeah, so all these things that where you would assume sympathy to some degree, he's playing with. Vaughn and Staples are really just kind of messing around with your capacity to identify with characters.
Were you concerned? Because that's a long break. I never felt, and maybe that's just me, I never felt that they weren't coming back to it. They seemed to set the expectations pretty well. I was like, no, we're coming back to it. It is going to be a long break. I don't think we were expecting it to be that long, but they have taken like 6 months breaks in the past. Were you worried after that long a layoff? Were you ever concerned that it wasn't going to get picked up, or were you worried that they weren't going to be able to hit their stride? Because losing Marco is narratively that's a challenge.
Yeah, no, my concern was I knew they were coming back just because the anticipation was there and because you can tell that the creators both love the project so much. Yeah, for me, it was the concern of can they stick the landing? Although we're talking about like the back half here more than the final act. Can they recapture what made Saga good? And can they bring it to a satisfying conclusion? I don't think I need to remind most fans of Vaughn that he's a writer from Lost. He was one of the chief writers on a TV series that didn't stick the landing. Yeah, there is a concern there. So coming back to it with issue 55, I don't know, man. I've talked to other people who said the same thing, but for me, the concern is gone. Issue 55 was buoyant. It was doing all the things that I kind of love about Saga, challenging and innovative, and I'm exploring characters in complex ways while evolving the story and advancing the story. So maybe just a good start, or maybe there's nothing to worry about, and we can all, as a collective community of readers, just sit back and enjoy a generational work of comics art.
I mean, you're right, Vaughn. This is part of Lost. I have no doubt that there was a lot of interference. I don't think that Vaughn probably only had so much.
Yes, no question.
I thought Why the Last Man was a pretty perfect start to finish.
We Stand on Guard, which he wrote, very good.
You hope for the best. You do worry. They called a lot of character at the end of that first half. You do worry. It's like, wow, you're going to have to give us new characters that we can get invested in. We can't feel the loss of Marco, Robot, and all these different dynamics. We can't feel them too badly. So far so good. There's a lot of stories that still to tell, and we're waiting for Alana and Hazel to meet up with the Will again.
There's a destiny forming there, right?
And Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn's another character that we should loathe her.
And Sophie as well, still out there.
And they're all going to come back, and there's character interactions that we haven't even seen yet.
One of the things we have to sort of identify as a strength of the first half of the run was they were very good at shifting perspectives. Like the idea that you would have the grandparents of Marco's parents, Hazel's grandparents, show up, and then Marco and Alana are gone. Marco's mom becomes like your main caretaker / protagonist character for a few issues. I could not possibly imagine that working, but it worked. And then you have Petrichor come in. Prince Robot becomes almost a protagonist for a little bit. And then issue 55 comes out, and there's this unknown quantity of Koala Man on the cover, and I'm immediately intrigued. Tell me more about this koala guy. I'm ready to learn his story. So yeah, I think they're really good at shifting the viewpoint and creating all of these different characters for you to kind of pick which ones you identify with the most.
It's so satisfying, and we have this wonderful long-term storytelling. They're able to make these breaks work, because it can be challenging because you realize it was a completely different world before that break. July 2018.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the word COVID was.
The before times.
The before times. The United States had a very different political situation going on.
Yeah.
That would trickle down through entertainment, everything else. And Saga can be, in the best way that science fiction can be sort of have commentary on politics and entertainment and whatever. And they would do that. So then you always worry, oh, this is going to feel, with that long a break, will they need to do like a serious adjustment to the tone and the storytelling, or can they keep going on, or will it feel dated? And somehow they've been able to, I guess there's a timelessness to the stories they're telling, so it doesn't feel like, oh, this is so dated.
Yeah, there's a universality to the sort of political framework that they set up. Just this idea of nation. I mean, it's almost George Orwell 1984, right? Nations undertaking war just for the sake of war. You've got a proxy war. You've got pointless bigotry, which is just random, and this is where Hazel becomes really important as the central figure of it, who literally represents the concept that the differences you're perceiving between these two factions are entirely constructed and not really indivisible. You could apply that to virtually any conflict and read something of Saga into any world conflict. So you got a very universal love story, forbidden love, Romeo and Juliet. You got a universal story of family, which most people can relate to in some degree. And you've got a universal story of politics. Saga can kind of do it all, which is, I don't know. I mean, it almost makes it sound like lazy or something, or too broad, but it's not. It's still really focused on the individual characters' lives.
Did you catch, there was a little bit of press around this, the first live action version of a Saga character was on TV last year.
No, I don't think I did.
It was pretty subtle. It was a Taco Bell ad.
What?
Taco Bell's been doing these ads where people who are about to have a big moment, and then all of a sudden they hear a gong and they go to Taco Bell instead. And they had two people on a subway, apparently going to a Comic-Con or whatever, both dressed as Marco.
I'm in Canada. We don't have a lot of Taco Bell here, and I don't see the ads, but I'm immediately going to look that up because that's amazing.
It's so amazing because there's two guys dressed as Marco, and then one hears a gong and like leaves and goes to Taco Bell. I don't know if it was all done up and up legally, or if it was just a thing of somebody, the costumer was a fan of Saga, and so I was like, hey, let's have him dress like Marco. It's like, let's hope nobody sues. It caused a little bit of a stir. It's like, oh my God, there's Marco, and obviously he wasn't portraying Marco or anything like that. But it does make me wonder, somebody's going to try to do a Saga TV show.
Right.
And I hope it's a TV show and not a movie.
Oh, it would have to be, right? I can't see this being a film.
Do you think they can do it justice? And we were talking about Vaughn. They took a swing at Why the Last Man.
Yeah.
I didn't even watch it because of how poorly it was promoted.
Yeah, it really wasn't very prominent.
My understanding is it was pretty good.
Okay. See, I've heard that they were talking about, Jeff Lemire's Sweet Tooth, how it was a terrible idea during a pandemic to do this dystopian world. Maybe Why the Last Man fell into that same boat too.
There's some of that. Also, there was no buzz.
Yeah. You really had to look for it to know that it was coming.
Part of it is, I think they just didn't do a good job casting it. You need somebody with some pop. Ben Snetzer, not a big name guy, and didn't really pop on screen. It was just sort of a guy. Y needs to be really well cast. It has to be somebody with a ton of charisma and really has to pop on screen. And he just didn't. I have no doubt that he's a fine actor, but it just didn't work. Contrast that with very, very different project on Amazon, the Jack Reacher show.
Right.
Obviously, it's a very different character, but they got a guy with just who really popped on screen and had their whole advertising campaign around them. And it's like, oh, okay. I think Why the Last Man suffered from not the right time for the concept, didn't put any money behind it. They didn't have that really eye-catching, charismatic presence on it, and it just fell apart. And I don't want that to happen with Saga.
Vaughn has said in an interview he has no interest in a film adaptation of it. He said that people have already come calling. But man, it's such an undertaking. First off, it would be the most expensive show ever made. Pretty obviously.
It'd be like Star Wars every week, just from the character designs, and they would have to do motion capture. So many of the characters would not work well with prosthetics or anything like that.
It's a comic. I think that's one of the things that a lot of comic scholars like about Saga. Like it plays on things like, again, these gaps that it creates. It plays on the anticipation of waiting for next month's issue in ways that I think you could do with serialized television, but maybe not quite to the same effect. And then you've got Fiona Staples. We can't understate her impact because Fiona Staples is one of the most beautiful comics artists alive. You know what I mean? Like you get hypnotized by some of the things that she draws. There's just so much going against it. Like everything to me that's great about Saga has a connection to what makes the comics medium great. And I think Vaughn and Staples in particular are masters at exploiting the unique capacity of the medium they're working in. If you can get a visionary director or showrunner who can do that, cool, I'm going to watch it for sure. I just wouldn't expect it to be as good as the comic series.
They do such a great job with the cliffhangers, and comic books is a medium that can do cliffhangers so great, and it's amazing how many writers don't.
Yeah, again, probably for the reason you mentioned, right? Trying to write for a trade format where the cliffhanger is nothing. The cliffhangers turn the page. Whereas when it's serialized, it's, what do you mean I have to wait 30 days to find out if Goose is still alive? Which can be a really harrowing experience and adds to that overall fundamental narrative tension, which there is a ton of in Saga.
The first issue of Amazing Spider-Man I ever got, Spider-Man fought the Puma. Puma attacked Spider-Man in his apartment, and he threw Mary Jane out the apartment and then had a big fight, and then shows back up to the apartment, and there's Mary Jane waiting for him, and he's like trying to come up with an excuse, and the issue ended with her turning away, very melodramatic, saying, he's like, I've known all along that you're Spider-Man, and it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And it was a great issue it's a great first issue for a 10-year-old kid to, is like, what the hell? She knows he's Spider-Man?
I mean, that's the other aspect of Saga too, right? When it's doing these cliffhangers, some of them are plot-based, right? What's going to happen? But others are emotionally invested. How is this character going to react? So we're firing on all cylinders, I guess.
Cliffhangers can be real interesting because they do it in two ways, where one is, oh my God, the guy has a gun pointed at the character. What's going to happen when he pulls the trigger? But then some of them would be a little more philosophical or down the line, where at the end of an issue, the narration was like, yeah, everything was going great, but it wouldn't last very long. It's like, oh, somebody's going to die. And that could mean someone's going to die in the next issue, or that could mean somebody dies
30 issues later. They do great work with creating that anticipation. And as I said, it really helps. I mean, I would even argue, this might be counterintuitive, but I would argue even the 3-year break might help a lot considering what happened in issue 54, right? And giving us 3 years to like ponder, what is this going to mean? And where is Hazel going to be? And again, like, as we've already talked about, even the sort of breaking the fourth wall wanderings, like, can Staples and Vaughn get the band back together and make it satisfying in the back half? So I don't know. I think there's a way in which they actually built some hype by way of the hiatus that they took.
It was really a perfect time to have that break. They were on a creative high. The buzz just kept growing and growing. Having that be the end of the first half, and that's sort of how they've described it. That was the midway point for the story. And then letting everyone sort of just percolate on this, and the think pieces and articles in like Entertainment Weekly and mainstream publications talking about it, letting everyone sort of create their own headcanons of everything, is like, what's going to happen next? Where is the story going to pick up? Probably, there's more than one person who thought, well, maybe there's a way Marco could survive.
And maybe that's what the skull was about, right? In issue 55. No, he is very much dead.
Sorry, folks. So heartbreaking, because Marco had plenty of gas left in the tank story-wise.
Oh, yeah.
As we're talking, and this is a real reach, but I just read a story about one of the 911 shows just killed off a character. And they interviewed the showrunners and said, it's like, well, why'd you kill him off? It's like, and basically he said, it's like, because we ran out of stories.
That's not the right way to do it.
Now, that can mean a million things. That can mean we couldn't find anything else interesting for her character to do, or it could mean we don't like the actress anymore, or we don't get along with her, or she didn't want to be on the show anymore, whatever it means. But you see that all the time where the character is killed off, and it might be shocking because you don't expect characters, main or semi-main characters, to be bumped off. But then you look back and it's like, oh, yeah, that person hasn't done anything in 1 or 2 seasons, or the stories are pretty repetitive. And it's a shame because I liked the character. But on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, when they killed off Tara,
right,
good character, good actress, and good performance, but then they killed her off, and it was pretty shocking. But then you sort of look back, it's like, her story was told. It actually makes sense, and they got her together with Willow, then they broke her and Willow up, and then they got her back together with Willow, and then you realize, like, there wasn't really a natural progression for that character. You could see them just sort of like, well, we've told what we wanted to tell. And if we kill her off, it would create new opportunities for Willow specifically to have new stories. Marco didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like he still had people left to confront. He still had stories left to tell. He still had parents out there, a former fiance out there that didn't feel complete. But that's a good way to do it, sadly.
I think so, yeah, especially when you talk about the sort of thematic engagement of the series as a whole with this concept of violence. I think if Marco died resolved, that would in some ways sanctify the violence a little bit. Whereas, again, having, as you said, like it's not just Marco who dies; it's all these possible stories, all these conflicts that we're urging to see resolution for. Those die with him. And I think that's a better representation of death for me, because that, I mean, you talk to anybody who's lost someone, that's what you feel, all the moments that were unresolved and what could have been.
What other comic series are you currently following month to month?
Month to month? Whew, I have a hard time keeping up just with the Hickman XMen line month to month. Just trying to keep the Claremont Run project going. No, I think I'm pretty slight at this point. I'm mostly reading trades. And then actual gotta go to the comic book store to get the issues is pretty much just X-Men and Saga.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I've been for a long time. Saga was the only series that I was following monthly. I would every now and then pick up a run here or there of Spider-Man. I always end up coming back to Spider-Man.
There's been some good runs lately, though.
There have. I was really into the Spider-Man life story.
Yes. I can see that from my desk here, my copy of the trade.
I was lucky with life story. He's not the most beloved artist, but I really like Mark Bagley.
Oh, yeah.
Bagley is sort of an old school 80s style artist where not necessarily the prettiest art, but tells the story very well.
Yes.
And it comes out every month. The Bendis Bagley run on Ultimate could not have happened with any other artist, except for like John Romita Jr. or so 80s style guys who would plug away and no breaks, no 6 months gaps, no fill-in artists.
Not one.
Bagley also has very clean storytelling. So it's like, okay, I know exactly what he's trying to say. I grabbed on to Life Story and then it ended up being brilliant. That and Saga have been, like, over the last few years, the only thing that I read month to month. And I'll pick up a trade. Sex Criminals, I'll read the trade of that.
Oh, yeah.
But that doesn't have the same, got to pick up the next issue right away, can't wait. And like, no, I for some reason, I like seeing that in more of a collection.
I think I agree with you. It's much more introspective character melodrama.
It doesn't need the cliffhanger. With Sex Criminals, when they do the cliffhangers, like, oh, they split up, when are they going to get back together? I just find it irritating.
Yeah, because it's going to happen.
It's going to happen, and the plot's not going to move very well until they get back together.
Right. And it feels like a cheat the longer they drag it out.
With Sex Criminals, there's certain show, like, often with TV shows, where you don't want to see the two character, the couple get split up and put back together, put that together, because you don't really feel the tension, and it also makes the relationship feel a little cheaper. The Office, the last season of The Office, they were presenting some real issues with Jim and Pam, and I'm like, oh, come on, I don't buy this for a second, and it just makes them look crappy.
Yeah, and that's actually a really cool sort of connection point to Saga, because this is a thing in our media, right? We're really only capable of telling stories of people falling in love, falling out of love, and falling back in love. We don't really show relationships on the whole, and sort of all the different aspects of being in a relationship and working hard on the relationship to make the relationship work. And that's something Saga really goes for.
Yeah, even because they did have that one period where they were sort of separated, and you never doubted for a second that they were going to end up, they were trying to find each other, not trying to decide if they wanted to be back together. There was like the chase of trying to find each other, and it felt organic. And also, they earned their troubles because high stress situation. And plus, they were star-crossed lovers on the run. How does a relationship like that grow and be healthy when everything is life or death? there's something interesting to tell. Is like, okay, once things have settled down. Well, you mentioned Romeo and Juliet. I remember my theater professor in college said it's like that's a terrible relationship.
And that's the point, right? Yet we herald it as a love story. It's not. It's a story about stupid kids on hormones wrecking everyone's lives.
Yeah, I remember my professor says, like, listen, all everyone needed to do is just leave them alone. They would have broken up in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, my favorite is that all the most romantic things that Romeo says, the ones that we quote extensively and say that's from Romeo and Juliet, he's not talking about Juliet. He's talking about Ethel in a lot of his most famous romantic monologues, because that's who he is. He's a poser who can string together beautiful poetry about whatever girl of the week he's attracted to.
When we first see him, he's waxing poetic about another girl.
Yeah.
The dance that he goes to and sees Juliet for the first time, he was going to see the other girl. Also, just how stupid Romeo was. He realizes that Juliet is the other family. He went to a party for the other family. That would be like, I don't know, going to the Republican National Convention and being surprised that there's so many Republicans there. It's like, yeah, that's where you're going.
He's trolling, basically.
You're actually the one who's a surprise. Saga, because they didn't kill everyone off immediately, did have a chance to dive into. It's like, oh, Marco isn't very mature. Marco had Gwendolyn. He was engaged before. I remember it was so shocking. They sort of had Elena flash back to one of her previous relationships. And I was like, oh, that's right. These people didn't just begin the moment they laid eyes on each other.
Yeah, and they actually have Marco being infatuated with a neighbor right in the midst of his marriage to Alana. And it's like it comes down to a choice. She wants to be with Marco, and he says, no, I can't. I got to make my relationship work.
What's interesting is we're getting down towards the second half. We're looking at another 5 years of stories, roughly. Of course, there could be breaks in between there. They often would do, 9 to 12 issue runs and then take 6 months off and then another 9 to 12. Do you think they're setting up right now and they're getting the big plot together and then they're going to sort of push through? And there's no way for us to know this, but you've read comics a lot. You can sort of get a sense of these things. Do you think that we're getting down to the final push, or do you think it's going to still go in 3 or 4 different directions so it can feel unrecognizable in a year or 2 from now?
Well, I think it definitely has the web of actors going, as in like not thespians, but people who act. You have all these characters with different grudges established. They've all been attacked by each other in some way, shape, or form. Some of them are alive, some of them are dead. The question is going to be who gets to have their revenge, who gets to have their conflict, and who gets denied it. Based on, again, the sort of just established theme of the series of the pointlessness of violence, I'm not expecting a happy ending. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they create something that is dissatisfying that way, but also poignant. So yeah, no, I think we're going to continue to see what we saw for the first few years of Saga, ultimately culminating in probably some sort of anticlimax. But I'm like really excited to read that anticlimax.
I don't need a happy ending, but I need something honest to the story. There have been so many weird or interesting side characters that have been shed, and I wonder if there's a thing of them bringing them back into the fold. Thinking of Clara, Marco's mother.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't seen her for a long time, and they did sort of write her out. She could be gone for the remainder of the series.
Right.
She's in prison. She sort of decided to stay there, but she was a really interesting character, and you called that before. She was, in a lot of ways, the main character of the story for a little bit.
I mean, you're talking about someone who was brought in as like the cloying mother-in-law who doesn't approve of her son's marriage. How do you make that your main protagonist in a science fiction space opera? But they did, and it worked, and she was awesome and kind of badass.
Are there characters like that you're hoping for, and you're looking forward to them returning?
Yeah, I think for me, because as we've talked about Hazel as sort of the main viewpoint character, there's another child's character in Sophie who is out there, has been really fundamentally built up. And it'll be really interesting to see how her destiny sort of coincides with Hazel's. Are they, destined to kill each other kind of thing? Or do they somehow break the cycle? Or does Sophie not come back prominently at all, which would absolutely shock me? I assume she's going to play a bigger and bigger role in the back half.
It was interesting when the Will asked about Sophie and Gwendolyn, basically saying she went off to college.
Yeah.
That could be them. Is like, you know what? We've told Sophie's story. She's earned a little bit. She's earned a happy ending. She's earned a healthy life, and get her out of this. But that's not Vaughn.
No, he's invested too much into that character, right?
Sophie's had a really interesting and horrifying arc. She was a 6.5-year-old prostitute. Then she became an assistant, and they didn't give short shift to the trauma and everything that she suffered. It was a very real thing. She is shown wanting to be like the Will.
Yeah, but also rejecting him in some ways too, right?
Yeah, like she became aware of what he was.
Yeah.
The Will's a fascinating character because he's a bloodthirsty killer, but he's also a man of honor in certain aspects. And this is a guy who wears a superhero cape.
Yep.
So it'll be very interesting to see how she is brought back into the story. This could end, and there would be a wonderful symmetry of it being Sophie and Hazel, the final showdown. And I have no idea where that could end. For all we know, Sophie is who Hazel's been writing these letters to.
I hadn't thought of that. Now I'm going to have that in my head.
Because that's another thing. We do not know who Hazel's talking to, and it could just be talking to the reader. But I think it'd be too brilliant to have that moment where, at the end of one issue, a character shows up in full spread, and then Hazel saying, "Is like, and that's when I met you."
I really like this plan. This is kind of awesome.
What are you hoping to see within the next 6 issues? We're still in the midst of the setup.
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to once we sort of get past that? Once they stop setting the pieces?
Well, I mean, exactly. When we talk about like narrative theory stuff, I want the Act 1 stuff that's really kind of cool about defining the future. I want the conflict set, and I want the trajectory of the story to kind of be established. The characters are there. We got that in issue 55. There's some great dynamics. There's some new faces. There's some old threats resurfacing. So yeah, no, I want to know where we're going a little bit. And like, I don't need to know the absolute specifics of where we're going, but I want to know what we're engaging with and what type of story we're telling and how we're evolving it from the type of the first half of Saga. So yeah, no, I think the next 6 issues are going to be just pivotal in terms of defining the success of the overall series.
What else are you reading and you're enjoying right now?
What else am I reading and enjoying?
Doesn't have to be comic books.
It usually is, just because that's my field, right? I've been reading a lot of comic books by Indigenous creators, working on something in that respect. And with that, I've been reading the comic scholarship book Graphic Indigeneity, which engages with that concept quite directly. And I've been enjoying a lot of that. Tom King's Borders recently came out in graphic novel form. That was great. And I've been working on, which connects to Saga, I've been working on an article for PCA and for a media piece on representations of non-binary gender in young adult or children's graphic novels. And Saga is wonderful at moving outside of sex and gender binaries. I've been reading The Excellent Snapdragon by Kat Leigh. I've been reading The Backstagers by James Tynion, who most people know as the Batman writer. Nimona by N.D. Stevenson. There's a lot of really great stuff out there.
Tom King there's a new generation of superstar, if not superstar, at least buzzy writers. Nick Spencer, Tom King, like the first generation of hotshot writers. And I mean that lovingly, not as a shot. After Bendis and Bendis's contemporaries. They're still really having a lot of success as straight ahead comic book writer. King had his run on Batman that got a lot of eyes on it.
I liked it.
I liked it too. He basically did for Batman what Bendis did for Spider-Man, where he was able to tell stories that people have been afraid to tell for so long.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
King's that next generation, and it'll be interesting because there tends to be a cycle where every generation of creators goes through this, where they start off having a great run on an established series. When I was growing up, it was Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld. They started doing work on Spider-Man or Hulk or X-Force. They get all the buzz, and then they go off and they do their own projects. What was it with Kirkman? Kirkman had done work on Spider-Man and other stuff, and then he had his creator-owned stuff. Bendis, same thing. Bendis was actually a little backwards, where he got the buzz doing Powers, and then he came and started doing the mainstream stuff.
Daredevil, yeah.
Now it's King and Spencer's turn, where they're doing this really cool, buzzy stuff with mainstream comics. Watch them doing the creator-owned stuff, what really catches on. It's sort of neat knowing that you are at the end of the first act of Tom King's career.
Yeah, and I think that gets amplified now that we have the whole Substack situation taking shape, right? There's a massive financial incentive for creators to, exactly as you're saying, make a name for themselves and then go truly independent and make money on a digital platform where, you know, they're not giving up a huge chunk of their paycheck to the publisher.
Robert Kirkman really did that. I mean, he stuck the landing. Kirkman built up buzz and then was becoming a pretty well-liked, you know, he did his stuff on Ultimate X-Men, Ant-Man, Marvel Zombies. Then he's like, okay, now Walking Dead. And then he owned Walking Dead and then maintained control of that even when it went to a different media. I'm sure Kirkman's got to be swimming in Scrooge McDuck money, right?
I like to think. I mean, I've looked at the Amazon sales charts for graphic novels, so yeah, I'm pretty sure.
He also has like creative control over the TV show.
And Invincible.
Yeah, Invincible and Walking Dead, and there's 3 or 4 Walking Dead shows that I'm sure he's getting nice paychecks for those. And so I'm sure King and Spencer and other creators are looking at it like, that's what I want. Not everyone can do it, because again, Vaughn had his issues with Why the Last Man. Bendis tried to do the Powers TV show that I think you had to, like, you could only watch that show on your ColecoVision or something.
Mark Millar.
Yeah, well, Millar's. I've never liked Millar.
He's got a sweet relationship with Netflix going.
He taps into something, and the Millarverse stuff on Netflix, it's a great deal. I didn't like Ultimates or Old Man Logan. I thought was okay.
Yeah, I didn't hate it.
Wanted, I hated.
Yeah, it was a lot, I would say.
Gets really into the deconstruction. Sometimes he goes 2 or 3 steps too far. I'm like, I just want all these people to die. Killer was supposed to be the antagonist, and he was supposed to be the bad guy that you like the most. It's like, no, he should die. But that's my own personal stuff. So Andrew, I'm so glad we did this. Thank you so much for coming on, and you suggested that we talk Saga, and I'm so excited. I'm always excited to talk Saga. I need you to plug your pluggables. Talk more about Claremont Run and everything else you have going on.
Okay, I've got the Claremont Run social media feed going on Twitter, which is at Claremont Run, where we post daily stuff about Chris Claremont's run on X-Men. It's like, I think at this point, it's probably the biggest, most holistic academic study of a single comics author like ever, but I could be wrong. I like it though. It's pretty good. So you should check us out at Claremont Run.
And you're on Claremont's radar.
Yeah, I've talked to his partner and his partner / agent Beth. I've interviewed him, and he's commented on a few threads.
What's he doing right now?
Gambit.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah, so he's back in the X line.
It's sort of acrimonious there for a little while.
Oh yeah.
It feels like Marvel's been making some efforts to bring some people back into the fold.
Yeah, they've been seemingly showing some goodwill, which I think is great.
None of these people live forever. The fans have so much goodwill built toward them. Claremont did something amazing with X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
His run on that was, 15 years?
16
years, and it was just an unstoppable series for so long. And he did it with very different artists, so many other combinations of writer and artist. I'm thinking of Peter David. Peter David had a great run on the Hulk, and he had some great artists with him. But once Tom McFarlane left the Hulk, Peter David still had a great run afterwards, but it was never it wasn't like the top book afterwards.
Yeah.
John Burns, when they really think of when X-Men, Uncanny X-Men reached that peak, they think of Claremont Run. And obviously there was great work done before that, but that was when it really hit its peak. And I think a lot of people, if you would told everyone, it's like, hey, this is this amazing combination, but Byrne's going to leave, and that was Byrne at his peak, a lot of people would figure, oh, that's going to sort of crash back to earth. It became more popular after Byrne left. And having great runs with Silvestri and Romita Jr. and
Paul Smith,
possibly my favorite of his artists.
I think it's my favorite, yeah.
Smith, he didn't get a chance. He didn't have the longest runs. Smith, I always felt, aside from maybe early Frank Miller, Smith drew my favorite type of Wolverine fighting.
Yeah. And I think he was actually riffing on Miller a little bit too. That you could see some kind of homages there.
Silvestri and Jim Lee, I would see often when they would draw Wolverine fighting, it was a lot of like hacking and tearing into people and a lot of berserker rages.
Yeah.
Which I found boring after a while. But Smith and Miller and maybe a little bit Romita Jr., they were the ones that actually felt like sword play when he fought.
Yeah, very tactical, sort of chess matchy fighting.
And that was always my favorite Wolverine. Like, that's how Wolverine should fight.
Right.
And then once a year, once every 2 years, then he gets real mad and then he like flies into a rage and then it's different. An amazing run, and nobody's had as close to a sustained run. There's been certainly great runs post Claremont, but it makes you appreciate just how difficult it is to do something that long.
Yeah, that long and that well. It's crazy.
We recommend everyone check it out. Andrew, we're going to have you back.
Deal.
That wraps episode 257. Big thanks to Andrew Deman. Really smart and an awesome guest. Looking forward to his return. Next time on the Cosmic Geppetto podcast, musician Pete Ferber returns to talk about the albums that started him on his musical journey. Till then, in the words of Jarve Hardin,
see you in the funny pages.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at CosmicGPod and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net.
Claremont Run. Claremont Run.